Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I could have your attention, please. Good afternoon. My name is Williamson. I am the president of the Foreign Correspondents Club Hong Kong. Welcome to the FCC, and thank you for joining us this afternoon to say thank you and sadly farewell to investor and activist David Webb. The name David M. Webb is synonymous with good governance and transparency. A much lauded figure among journalists across the region. For more than 25 years, David Webb's non-profit platform, website.com, has offered news, analysis, and opinion on Hong Kong affairs. Its extensive databases of companies, regulatory bodies, and people, rigorously sourced, compiled, and maintained, has served journalists as well as the public good for decades. But you all already know that, of course. I'm not here to give an introduction to Mr. Webb or his many achievements, titles, and accolades earned over an illustrious career. Everybody packed into our club for this talk are already fully aware of David Webb's multiple contributions to public life. The 80-plus people right here with me right now in the main dining room, which sold out in under an hour, know it, as do those watching the live stream in Bert's and in the main bar downstairs. In fact, in total, over 230 people are packed into the club today to hear from Mr. Webb, with many more still on the wait list. It is a testament to David Webb's the respect and admiration that many feel for David Webb's years of accurate reporting, incisive analysis, and his advocacy work. David, you know what? In hindsight, you're absolutely right. We could have booked Kai Tak. On behalf of the FCC, we are humbled that you didn't, and you've come to the club to address our members and their guests. We are deeply honored you've accepted our invitation to speak today. David, we are immensely grateful for you joining us today, as well as for everything else you've contributed in the course of your extraordinary life. Whether you are downstairs in Bert's, or downstairs in the main bar watching the live stream, or if you're here with me in this room, I ask each and every person to please take to your feet and join me in welcoming Philip Bowering and David Webb.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great honor for me to be sitting here to be moderator of this talk with David, who I've known for quite a number of years. I don't intend to do more than ask a few questions, and then David will talk, and then it will be up to the audience to question David. Hopefully, keep your questions very short and to the point. My first question, and maybe I won't have many more, is simply to start and ask David how he came to be rich enough and concerned enough at the very young age of about 32 to become a one-man NGO. So, David, will you please tell us about your early life and how you got to that point in, I think, 1998.
Well, thank you, Philip, and I'd like to thank the FCC for this event. It's great to be back here. I've been here maybe half a dozen times speaking in the last 27 years. Thanks to Richard Winter for setting it up, and to Philip, of course, who I've known for many years, for hosting this. Why did I do this? Well, I had the good fortune to be in Hong Kong after 5 years of investment banking in London in corporate finance. Before that, I was a teenage programmer and author of books for the early home computers, the Sinclair Spectrum and the Amstrad computer, if you're old enough to remember those. So I collected a lot of royalties from those while I was still at university and got interested in the stock market. And I used to sit there in the common room, in the junior common room, reading the Financial Times and getting on my bike down to the local Barclays Bank to place orders which would be telephoned through to London. We didn't have online dealing, we didn't have the internet, we didn't even have fax machines in those days. So I got interested in finance and finished my maths degree and went off to London at the age of 21, just before what they called Big Bang, a big financial reform in 1986. And I went through 3 different employers in investment banking in London, and the third one, Barclays, BZW as it was called then, sent me out to Hong Kong in 1991. Like many people in those days, I was on a 2-year secondment that then became indefinite. I loved it so much and wanted to stay. In 1994, I left the bank and went to work for a local conglomerate called Wheelock, and did 4 years there. And my investments were doing fairly well in the meantime. So in the depth of the 1998 market crash, which was a roll-on event from the Asian financial crisis that began in Thailand in 1997, my contract expired, and I thought, well, now's the time to do my own thing. I'd made enough money to be fairly certain I wouldn't need to work again, so I could offend whoever I liked in Hong Kong. I'd learnt about how the local community, business community, dodges around the regulations, exploits the system, and I thought I should put all that to good use, and the internet was coming of age as well. We were still on dial-up in 1998. For those of you who remember having a modem that could only handle 56 kilobits per second, and nowadays you've probably got 1,000 megabits per second on your fiber optic connection. And so I could see that was going to democratize publication. And because my background in computing, that was a fairly easy thing to do for me. No longer would you have to, as I had been, writing letters to the South China Morning Post and having them edited down to op-eds. I could actually write my own op-eds and circulate them through the website. And so I registered website.com in November 1998. Some of the first articles I'd written were about the peg, because the government had intervened in the stock market for the first time ever, lost their stock market virginity, as it were, and bought up 15% of the public float in the Hang Seng Index stocks. So I was writing about those issues and how that was a very bad idea. And I wanted to use the platform to advance corporate governance reforms in Hong Kong. There were various campaigns that ran on from that. The stock exchange at that time was owned by the brokers. There were just, the seats changed hands in a very obscure way. But after the government intervention in the stock market, they decided they needed to take control of the whole structure. And so you had the merger of the stock and futures exchanges, and HKX came into being in 2000. And in 2003, they had to have their first elections for a minority of the board, though. To this day, the government appoints 7 out of 13 directors, and the other 6 can be elected by shareholders. But I thought that was a good chance to run a campaign on the back of my activism for a seat on the board of HKX, which I won in 2003, and retained with what Trump would call a landslide in 2006, alongside Christine Lowe, who's here today, my compatriot then. We got 2 seats on the board. So that was one of the things I did, along with demanding that companies start counting their shareholder votes properly. They used to have in a shareholders meeting, they would have a handful of employees who'd been given the morning off to come and attend and vote in favour of everything with a show of hands. The chairman would say all those in favour, and they put their hands up, and anyone against, and I would put my hand up, and that was a futile exercise. So I set up a project in 2003 to exploit the company law to create 5 shareholders, me and my wife and 3 BVI companies, and attend on their behalf and demand that the votes should be counted 1 share, 1 vote, poll voting, which became a mandatory listing rule in 2009, I believe. So by making all the big companies do it, I just picked on the Hang Seng Index and the stock and HKX itself. I overcame the opposition from the large companies who run the system here, indirectly through the listing committee and so on. We got that done. So nowadays you do get 1 share, 1 vote, although unfortunately Hong Kong has been racing to the bottom with the introduction of so-called weighted voting rights, in other words, second-class shares for the public with lower voting rights in companies here. Long answer to your first question, Philip, but let's get back to it.
Well, I mean, there's many questions about the stock market and regulation thereof that I'm sure the audience will want to ask. I'd like to ask some broader questions about Hong Kong and how you see it. I mean, you've been described in Wikipedia as the long hair of finance. Do you regard that as a compliment, or?
Well, Lung Kwok Hung and I don't have exactly the same politics. I'm certainly not a Marxist. And I think that was when in 2003, with all this turning up at AGMs, in the middle of SARS, by the way, so everyone was masked up. The media, particularly the Chinese media, wanted a way to explain what I was doing, and so they said, he's Chung Mo, he's the long hair of the financial markets, he's an activist, and it kind of stuck, although the hair's a bit shorter and thinner now, but and I never wore it that long, but yeah, that's how they explained it. Yeah.
Can you say a bit more about how you see the problems of Hong Kong today in terms of over-regulation, of issues like, I mean, we've been talking about land lease reform for 40 years. Nothing happens.
Well, it's very sad that Hong Kong has moved away from the laissez-faire economy that made it so successful in the 70s to 90s, indeed since the Second World War. Let's go back further, since 1841, basically. We had a small government that stuck to its core duties to ensure that people had access to education, to healthcare, and a social safety net for the less fortunate in life of a welfare system, of which we could do more if we weren't throwing money around at unworthy causes. Unfortunately, over time, and this began even before the handover with the creation of the MPF scheme under Patton, but it got much worse in the last few years, last couple of decades, and now we've moved to a system which is closer to the mainland in terms of central planning. We even see TV advertisements about how we must absorb the lessons of the 17th, or whatever it is now, 5-year plan, and integrate ourselves with the motherland. And what made Hong Kong special was differentiation. If you're a mathematician, you know it's the opposite of integration. It was doing our own thing best and not trying to sign up for some economic planning. Instead, what we're doing is pumping hundreds of billions of Hong Kong dollars into white elephants near the border. There's some belief that if you stand close enough to the border in Hong Kong, or boundary as I should call it, and if you inhale deeply, technology will fill your veins. We will somehow absorb all of that from Shenzhen, and that it's well worth allocating land not to the highest bidder, but to the chosen companies that should have it, because the government knows best. which sectors and which companies even should have access to that important resource. The reality is, of course, that as long as the basic law is in effect, and there is a question mark now, how long beyond 2047, we only have 22 years left, people need to start thinking about that, but if it's still in effect, then we have customs controls, immigration controls, different tax regimes, freedom of capital movement here and not there, and there are multiple barriers that they cannot finesse. If they want to move the border down and put it around the Loc Marchal Loop and the Shenzhen hub and all that stuff, and give some land to the motherland, fine, but then it becomes part of Shenzhen, or oppositely, if Shenzhen gives some land to us. But either way, those barriers need to stay in place. And so it's a wasted use of public money, and it has to come from somewhere. We're burning through our reserves. There were some very stupid decisions during COVID about how we dealt with the money. We blew about a third of our fiscal reserves on handouts, for example, to supermarkets to keep employing people, when, of course, they had a fantastic time. When the restaurants were forced to close, the supermarkets sold a lot more food for home cooking. They didn't need those handouts. We didn't have a furlough scheme instead, where you got paid for being put out of work by the government, which would be fair. I mean, if you shut down a beauty parlor or a restaurant, then the people involved should be compensated. But instead, we blew it, and then we had all these feel-good cash handouts as well, which, you know, at one point, I wasn't allowed to exercise outdoors without a face mask, so I spent my voucher on a treadmill and exercised indoors instead. But you know, people like me don't need vouchers, and that was wasteful, and so is what we're doing with the central planning, and I think government's starting to regret having the $2 fare scheme, particularly for bringing the age limit down. 1/3 of the population now roughly qualifies for that. If I'm lucky, I'll get to my 60th birthday on the 29th of August, and I will get my Joyu card, which I'm going to apply for at the end of this month, the Joyride card. But it's costing $5 billion a year. That is pretty wasteful when you could be giving welfare to people who need it.
I mean, one of the things you've been very critical of is stamp duty on stock transactions and property transactions. Now, if we get rid of those, which may very well be a good idea, and how would you replace it? What sort of tax reform would you put in if you get rid of stamp duties?
Well, the key thing is to cut back on the expenditure. You don't need to raise a lot more revenue than we already do. And stamp duty used to be a small part of our revenues, because, you know, if you cut back on the heavy infrastructure, central planning stuff, then we can balance the budget without materially raising revenues. Stamp duty was introduced by King William and Queen Anne in the, I think, 1600s or late 1600s to finance a war, and it was meant to go on for a few years. And here we are, you know, over 300 years later, and it was propagated out to the British Empire and copied elsewhere. But it's a frictional tax. It doesn't tax a profit or a capital gain. You might be selling something at a loss. It slows down the movement of people with their properties. The government has now basically exempted those transactions below 4 million Hong Kong dollars. You only pay $100 of duty. But we should exempt all of that, just scrap stamp duty. And you know, if people are trading properties as a business, which developers do, of course, and people might be buying properties to renovate and then selling them, then they get taxed on their profits. That's fine. But you know, the USA has no stamp duty on stocks and much higher stock market turnover. China has reduced stamp duties over time on its stock market and should abolish it as well. And you know, that would take the sand out of the wheels of the economy. People would, you know, I didn't buy a flat here until 2006 because I knew that my requirements over time were changing. First I was single, then I got married, then we had one kid, then we had another kid. And it wasn't until after that I thought we're probably stable now. I'm willing to spend a year's rent on stamp duty to have a property of our own. And of course I did it through an offshore company so that I can, although I paid the duty through the company, I can now sell the company without paying stamp duty. And in fact, that's the way the majority of transactions in the above $20 million bracket are or were structured and are now again because we've abolished the special stamp duty, the buyer's stamp duty, and all that paraphernalia that the government brought in. That has been scrapped. And so you put an envelope around the company and then around the property, and you can transfer the offshore company without paying stamp duty. So the wealthier people who can afford to do that, can avoid stamp duty after they've made their first purchase, or if they're buying an enveloped property already. So let's just scrap it. On profits tax, we've indulged in stupid gimmicks to the profits tax regime, like super deductions for so-called research and development. Now, what that does is to set up a new department in the Inland Revenue, full of people who spend their time arguing with companies about whether their expenditure is research and development. Are they making a toaster with internet features or something like that can tell you when the toast is ready? Is that R&D or not? So we end up with more money for accountants who then argue with the Inland Revenue and more money spent on that gimmick. But the low rate of profits tax here of 16.5% was never a deterrent to an entrepreneur setting up a new business. And maybe other deterrents, but that isn't one of them. Making a profit is a nice problem to have, and you pay that rate of tax without issue. Similarly, the 50% rate for the first 2 million of profits that was introduced, another, I think, Carrie Lam gimmick. Well, what that did was that people who own their businesses will pay, they'll make sure that their companies, if they're making more than 2 million, they will leave 2 million inside the company and pay the 50% rate, 8.25%, and then they'll take the rest out as a dividend. And if you're a barrister, for example, you're self-employed, so now your first $2 million of profits are only taxed at 8.25%. Lovely.
I mean, apart from stamp duty, what other measures do you think are needed to revive, the stock market? I mean, Hong Kong stock market is not what it was, and
right.
Any improvements seem to be entirely based on what may or may not IPOs come from the mainland.
Yes, and the issue there is that the worse your corporate governance system, for example, Hong Kong still has no class action system, even for consumers who might be sold tainted products or they might be suffering from anti-competitive behavior. There's no class action system to remedy that. That if you have a weak framework, then investors will pay less for stocks. And that drives out companies that believe they're worth more in other markets. So, the higher your standards, the greater the protection for investor rights, the more they will pay for stocks, making your market more attractive to companies. But instead, Hong Kong and other markets, including London, have been racing to the bottom. London recently abolished the rules on related party transactions that required a shareholder vote when a company was dealing with its controlling shareholder. Now, you can imagine in Hong Kong, if we scrapped those rules, how much damage would be done to investors by abusive transactions. All you have to do in London now is get a fairness opinion from a two-bit financial advisor. It's fair and reasonable, go ahead. And London did that in the mistaken belief that they were losing business to America and that if they relaxed their rules, they would attract companies. In fact, it's the opposite. Relaxing the rules lowers the valuations of stocks, which makes the market less attractive. The reason that ARM went to the USA was for a higher valuation, even though they are exposed to the class action system of the USA by listing there. And they do have some of these weaker rules on related party transactions in America, but they have a much stronger litigation system to deter bad behavior. London doesn't have a class action system and now doesn't have those approval processes. And that's rather a shame. So, I hope that Hong Kong can hold the line against further weaknesses, further weakening of the rules. But we're heading down that track. We've abolished quarterly reporting on the GEM board. We've given up talking about it on the main board, even though the motherland 20 years ago introduced mandatory quarterly reporting for all mainland listed companies. They are ahead of us. How bad is that? We're supposed to be the financial center of China, but in some ways, the mainland is ahead of us on disclosure.
Maybe we could change the subject a little bit. Can you talk something about website and how you see now that you having to cease keeping it going, how you see its future maintenance, and how optimistic are you that enough people, enough companies, enough institutions will take up from where you are forced to leave off?
Yeah, well, I've fought the disease as hard as I could, and I'm still fighting. But there is an obvious end to it, and I wanted to be in control of the shutdown of website and find a way for people, if they wish, if they find what I've been doing useful, which they seem to, judging by the attendance today, to take it forward. So when it became clear that I was running out of treatment options, and in the probably the final year, I wanted to have an orderly shutdown. And so I announced that in February. Some people took that to mean that I was going to completely shut it down and not make it available. But I did plan and later announced that I would make a repository available. That is now, on the 1st of May, online. So data scientists, NGOs, statutory bodies who are interested in taking it forward can do so. There's a complete backup of all the data from the database, and all of the code that I wrote over the years to run the site and to collect the data. So it's not, if you don't know computing, it's not simple, but there are plenty of young people now who do, can access those multi-gigabytes of data and set up and take the data forward. And I've published it under what's called a Creative Commons CC BY license, which means all you have to do is say where you got the data. It's provided as is without liability, and you can then either commercialize it, or if you can afford, I hope some people will afford to make it available to the public for free, as I did. It didn't cost that much. You just have to run a server, basically, and hopefully people can start using AI to simplify and cut the costs on data entry, because for all the time that I've been maintaining it, I've paid an assistant to do a lot of manual data entry, reading company announcements when a director is appointed or an auditor resigns, for example. And that in the future might be done with automation or AI assistance. And there is, I can't name it, but there's a statutory body that has shown interest in taking parts of this forward, hopefully making it publicly available. And I hope that universities here or overseas might do so as well. Certainly I had interest from overseas universities. As you may know, I tried to set up and sponsor a website, a David Webb Center for Public Transparency at Hong Kong U, and we went a long way down that road over several months before it was killed by the senior management team for whatever reasons. You'll have to ask them, but there wasn't the appetite to do it in Hong Kong after the NSL, and hopefully in the future conditions will be more favorable to public data transparency in Hong Kong and regionally.
I mean, one final question from me before this goes to all of you. Apart from creating the website and the database, what's your proudest achievement during your years in Hong Kong?
Well, apart from my kids and my family, of course, I think over the years, not all of the campaigns succeeded. I didn't expect them to. And the key thing is, when you're an activist, to refocus your efforts, to assess your own progress annually at least, and drop things which have reached a brick wall, put them on the agenda for later when the doors might be open, and find the open doors on which one can push. I was here a few years ago pushing hard against the company's registry plan to redact ID numbers in the registry. And to this day, they still have a paywall, which is quite disgraceful, on the company's registry and the land registry. Both of those registries in the UK are open, in New Zealand and other places, because there's a public interest in these things and a very minimal cost to making digital databases that they have internally available to the public. You might say, oh, but the user should pay, but then why aren't we charging for entrance to public parks or for walking down the street, because it costs money to maintain these things? Simple thing is that the public good outweighs the small cost of doing that. We pushed back against that. The government shelved it for a few years, so that was some achievement. But then eventually they did introduce it and obfuscate the numbers. Ironically, at the time I pointed out by example that there were multiple Chanchi Kungs with the same first 4 digits of their ID number, and if you redacted those, you wouldn't know the difference. But I also pointed out that you could see their numbers on the website in the source code, right? Well, it took another couple of years before the Privacy Commissioner noticed this problem. And who was the Privacy Commissioner? Well, she is still the Privacy Commissioner, Ada Chung, and she was the Registrar of Companies before that, at the time that all this was happening. So her office is now investigating, I believe, the company's registry's so-called data leak, which happened under her watch. And none of that would be an issue if we just published ID numbers from the get-go. So you could be clear when somebody is appointed to a government body which Chanchi Kung that is, instead of publishing meaningless gazette notices with common names where, when we're doing our data entry, because we tracked 800 statutory advisory bodies, sometimes we just couldn't tell who it was, appointed to the Building Appeals Committee or the Cats and Dogs Classification Board or whatever. And so we just had to create a new persona in the database and find out later if we can match them up.
Right, okay. Now, open to the floor. Can we have some questions, please? Keep them very brief and to the point, please.
And identify yourself.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Brian. Sorry, I have a loud voice anyway. On your starting of the website was to encourage democratization of information on sort of modems, right? The world now, you can do so much more, obviously, with tech. And so how would you see the ideal website in 20 years? You know, how do you think this expertise that you have and all of these new developments should actually progress and make something new?
Well, you know, it was set up to campaign on initially corporate governance and economic governance, and that's still been the central theme of it, whether it was talking about the peg and dollarization. I mean, we've been married to the same girl since engaged to the same girl since 1983, and haven't married her, the dollar, right? And we never will now. The US dollar is kind of, well, we can't, you know, politically incorrect to even talk about using the US dollar as local currency. So that was the objective. My kids always take the mickey out of the design. So, you know, this is so 1990s, Dad. When are you going to go to Webb 3.0 or 4.0 or whatever? But it serves its purpose. I never wanted to clutter it up with advertising and video, you know, stuff. There's not many videos on it. You know, I don't know exactly what the future of technology will be. I think you know, bandwidth has been a key issue and predictable in its benefits. There was a time when you couldn't really do streaming video. There was something that came out called Real Video or something at one of the early efforts, well before YouTube. And now, of course, you can. And probably in technology, that's going to evolve further. We're going to have virtual 3D live streaming, where you could be in this room and look around and take any perspective while I'm talking, from the very high bandwidth that's coming at you. Because if you want to have a 360 field of view in a sporting event or something, you need 40 times the bandwidth that we currently have for a 4K stream. So technology will evolve, but we've already got to a point where long ago you could put your own opinions out there. Sometimes there are too many, possibly from social media, but that has helped a lot. I'm not in favour of censorship. I think that efforts to tell social media platforms to regulate commentaries on controversial issues just make it easier for them to maintain a fort around their business. That's they can set up a department when smaller companies can't. So, yeah.
Question here.
Anna Fenton, former president of the club. David, could you get out your crystal ball and tell us what you think will happen to the peg?
Well, it's here to stay. I mean, one thing the government doesn't like doing is change, whether it's taxation policy, stamp duty, or parking fines or anything else. They've known this system since '83. It works well because we're a very externalized economy. I mean, Hong Kong is a small place. Effectively, you exchange your US dollars or other foreign currencies for the Hong Kong dollar token for the US dollar when you come in and out again. And given that trade is several 100% of GDP, it wouldn't make sense to have a floating Hong Kong dollar. But I hope that one day, and it should have happened long ago, China will abolish capital controls completely and have free movement of the RMB across its borders. And when it does, and after a few years of being confident that it won't go back on that, then I think Hong Kong would probably start adopting the RMB as its currency, and the Hong Kong dollar would fade into obscurity at that point. But right now, the Hong Kong dollar system works. It could be better. I wouldn't have this vague, jobs worth thing where the peg fluctuates between 775 and 785, what Joseph Yam called constructive ambiguity. Well, why not just fix it at 7.8? And his rationale seemed to be it creates jobs for foreign exchange dealers. Well, couldn't they be doing something more productive? So it could be improved, but I don't think it's going away. And occasionally you get someone grandstanding from America, some hedge fund guy who will say, we've taken a position against the peg. But I think for now it's here to stay, and there's so far no sign that China is going to move forwards with economic reforms of that nature.
Question over there.
Thank you, sir. Sincere thanks to you for all the good work you have done to Hong Kong, David. A club member and a journalist. You wrote a post last year saying that while you increased the stake of Lion Rock Group, you say that you still have the Lion Rock spirit. Don't you think that Hong Kong people right now still have that spirit, representing the value of solidarity and perseverance? And secondly, any message you would like to extend to journalists, fellow journalists, Hong Kong people, and especially to those who are encountering difficult moments in life? Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. The Lion Rock spirit, what I meant by that was, the sheer dynamism, entrepreneurialism that fueled Hong Kong's economic growth up to the 90s and beyond. This opportunity economy, where self-reliance and self-improvement was the theme, and not expecting the government to hand out to you and underwrite your loans, for example. I mean, they're doing that now for hundreds of billions of dollars of small company loan guarantees that we don't need. It waters the weeds. It keeps companies going longer than they should and gets in the way of what Schumpeter called creative destruction, to allow companies to fail so that the flowers can bloom. And so that's what I meant by the lion rock spirit. And words for the media, well, you know, I was a signed-up associate member of the Hong Kong Journalists Association, which, like many organizations, is under attack. You know, all I can say is that I believe in the long run that China and Hong Kong will be less autocratic, more democratic, and will move away from the authoritarian system, because there's no way to maintain economic growth by central planning, by creative design, if you like. It's much better to let the free markets work to produce the growth. And people say, but what about the Chinese economic miracle? Look what happened since Deng Xiaoping opened up. Well, that's the point. They liberalized some sections of the economy. They allowed factories to choose which products to make and no longer have a production quota. They allowed farmers to choose which crops to grow and to sell them at a market rate in a free market environment. They generated the prosperity by relaxing central planning and controls up to a point, which has ended maybe 15 years ago. And so, you know, that failure to move forward eventually will lead to, in my view, to economic stagnation and pressure to reform. And I hope that it happens top down, that we get wise next generation leadership that pursues proper opening up, and that then, of course, the media environment, which was your question, will be a better place here and in the mainland, because you know, speaking truth to power and holding people to account and transparency is all good for the economy and for the people. So, you know, we may have reached in Hong Kong what I would call peak authoritarianism. Things I hope will get a lot better after my time. And when you replay this video, I hope I'm right.
The question at the back there.
Hey there, Andrew Work, Lion Rock Institute. I guess appropriate follow-up. David, first off, thank you for everything you've done for Hong Kong. Just so amazing. Thank you. And specifically for the Lion Rock Institute, whenever we needed advice or we asked you to come to an event, you were always very happy to help and give your insights. One area we did disagree on was competition law. We got one. What do you think about where we are and where it's going? And then I'm going to break the rule and do a follow-up. Philip asked you when you got started with website, and you told him the how. You said you had enough money and you had enough that you could, but I don't know that you really said why. What was in your heart? Why Hong Kong? What was inside you that at 32 years old you were like, I have to do this, and I have to do it for Hong Kong? So competition law and why?
All right, two questions, right. I'll do them in reverse. The why was really because I've always been a bit of an activist. And probably if I'd stayed in the UK, I might have ended up in politics. But if you have the good fortune to be in my position, with the accumulated skills I've got, the arguably genetic advantage in intelligence terms, and the financial security to be able to say what you think, then I could have just, carried on investing in the markets, focusing solely on that, and died a rich man. And all it would say on the grave was, he died a rich man. You can't take that with you. So the activism side, the getting things done, reforming the system, or stopping things getting worse, slowing down the pace of, because it's not always an upward trajectory, but if things would have been worse without the effort, that's also a win. In the company's registry is an example of that. We also pushed back on second-class shares for several years before it finally happened. Then, the activism is far more rewarding to me emotionally to look back and say, however long or short my life, and unfortunately it's shorter than I expected, you know, I will die confident that I did my best, and Hong Kong is my home. The reason why Hong Kong? Well, by then I was a permanent resident from 1998 onwards. I've been here 7 years. I was pretty certain I would stay here, and you know, wanted to make a contribution, and in the way that I could with my knowledge of the financial system, company law, accounting, securities law, and so on. So that was why. The competition law. Well, the issue, and I remember, I think it was 2001, I wrote an op-ed for the Financial Times, one of the few that I've done, on why Hong Kong should have a competition law. And the Financial Secretary, Anthony Leung, wrote the other piece on why we didn't need a competition law under Tung Chee-hwa. And the problem is that when a dominant company reaches a market position that it excludes new competitors, for example, if you owned all of the mobile phone spectrum in Hong Kong, nobody else could start a mobile phone company. You could charge whatever you liked. If you got together with the other mobile phone companies and agreed a price to fix your prices for consumers, you know, if there's no law against that, then prices will go up because there's only so much spectrum available. Many of our economics fields do have some constraint on introducing new competitors, and even if they don't, abusive behavior that keeps, for example, if supermarkets, I'm not saying they do, but if supermarkets tell their suppliers that if you supply the new guys, you can't supply us, or you'll be on the bottom shelf in our supermarket, then that tends to exclude new supermarkets. And you can't really tell the consumers, oh, don't worry, sooner or later there'll be a new competitor. In the meantime, put up with artificially high rent-seeking prices. So that's why I was in favor of a competition law. There was already a competition regime for telecommunications, but not for anything else. And so now we've had the law. It's been in place for about 12 years, and it is Swiss cheese. There are holes in it because although you can't collude on pricing, you can merge without any problem and have a single price for two companies if they get together and put it all into a joint venture or wholly owned. Then you know, there's no law against reviewing those mergers before they happen. So we need to go back and improve on that and put back in the things that were taken out in the drafting and improve it. But you know, I take the point that we shouldn't, which is where you're coming from, I believe. The Lion Rock Institute was very much opposed to the law, that we shouldn't go so far as to impinge on genuine competition between businesses. That is the lifeblood of the economy. I personally actually have suffered because one of my companies had some rogue staff who were involved in a cartel, and they rolled over and paid $150 million, or agreed to, fine to the Competition Commission, which was rather higher than I was expecting. And since I own about 8% of it, I've effectively paid $12 million to the Competition Commission for the rogue behaviour of their employees. You know, but still, I still support the concept, and we need to improve on it.
Thank you.
David, Mark Michelson. Thank you. I want to thank you, too, for continuing to cause what John Lewis, the American activist, called good trouble for Hong Kong. And you clearly haven't stopped doing that, and that's really important to us going forward. You alluded to what's called the Greater Bay Area, the GBA, and Pearl River Delta, whatever. And beyond breathing in the technology from standing at the boundary, do you see an opportunity there? Is that a concept that could work in some way or another? Or, as you mentioned, all the infrastructure, all the other stuff that's going in, maybe has made that challenging?
Well, the GBA is old wine in a new bottle. Tung Chee-hwa called it the Greater Pearl River Delta. It's always been there, and there's plenty of opportunity, certainly has been in the past, for, you know, since the 1980s, as soon as that Deng Xiaoping started to open up the economy and allow factories to own, or at least lease land, the industrialists of Hong Kong moved their factories. Look at Kwun Tong in the past, it was just one giant factory area. Now it's the new CBD 2.0 or whatever, full of office conversions or office blocks. And so, yes, they went north in search of cheap labor, cheap land. They did the rational thing, and that was a great boom for them and to the Hong Kong economy. What remained of those companies in Hong Kong was design, sales, marketing, where the products were made in the mainland. And some of the cities in the GBA, Dongguan, for example, is nothing, well, not nothing, but it's mainly a giant manufacturing center that has become less competitive over time because of rising prosperity, but that's fine. It helped the motherland to get, or the fatherland if you prefer, I don't want to be sexist about it, it helped them to raise prosperity to a point even where a lot of the most labor-intensive businesses now, before tariff regimes came in, had already started moving out. Shoes, for example, are mostly made in India and Vietnam. Garments all over the Southeast Asia region, and not so much in the mainland anymore. But the GBA is just a description of things we've been doing all along. It doesn't change the fact that we have one country and three systems, or four if you count Taiwan. Not sure if we should. But there's Macau, there's Hong Kong. There's no extradition treaty between Macau and Hong Kong, as Joseph Lau would tell you. There are technically three different currencies, although Macau is pegged to the Hong Kong dollar, to the US dollar. There are various barriers to greater integration, unless we scrap the basic law. And I think that's a question that needs to be addressed in the fairly near future, rather than just waving hands and saying nothing's really going to change, you just have to trust us, or as Trump would say, it's going to be a big, beautiful GBA, because the closer we get, we have to start telling lawyers who are going to universities here whether they should train to learn Hong Kong law and Commonwealth law, or whether they should learn mainland law. What's the point in 2040 of taking a degree in law in Hong Kong if you're not going to be practicing it after 2047? And the people studying it today hopefully will be in their prime, in their 40s in 2047, partners of law firms, but what law will they be practicing? Contracts need to be thought about, what law will those be under if they extend beyond 2047? Land leases, similarly, will we still have Hong Kong land law, or will it become the mainland system? So, there's a lot to think about there.
Our time is nearly up, but there's time for two more questions. One from over here and one from Mr. Winter here. We'll start over here, and very brief, please.
Hi, Joshua Zimmerman. What is the single most flamboyant, crazy incident of corporate malfeasance you've come across in your career?
Wow, that's a long list. I don't know how to prioritize them. Look, the Enigma Network article of 2017 took me months of research to bulletproof the diagram, make sure I wasn't going to get sued. And I've not been sued for anything over the years, because I always check the facts. But that basically exposed a network of 50 listed companies that were up to no good. Heavily dilutive share issues that financially damaged the investors, including me in one of those companies. And 50 boards with supposedly 3 independent directors each, 150 independent directors sitting there and doing nothing. And that system is an ongoing issue. We pretend we have independent directors in Hong Kong, but they're all elected by controlling shareholders. So they're only as independent as the controlling shareholder wants them to be, and nearly every company has controlling shareholders. But by exposing the practices in that network, I put pressure on the SFC that had been asleep at the wheel, basically, to wake up and start investigating other such systems as well as this one, and also to tighten up the rules on heavily dilutive share issues, which a few years later the stock exchange did amend the rules to limit the rate at which you can abuse your minority shareholders to 25% per year. So yay me. But we still haven't done anything about the INEDs. Instead, the committee, the listing committee and the stock exchange just sort of rearranges the deck chairs on the Titanic by saying, well, there should be 2 genders. Only 2? But there should be 2 genders, by which we mean there should be a woman on every board. And what happens, of course, is that the chairman's daughter or sister gets appointed and tick that box. Or that they shouldn't serve more than 9 years. But if they're incompetent to start with, why wait 9 years to get them off? Or they shouldn't have more than 6 seats. Well, does that, if they can really handle it and they're fairly simple companies and they're fully retired, maybe the shareholders should be in charge of that decision. Do they want or not want that person to sit in their 7th position? So I think that article on its own did kickstart a lot of reforms to the SFC's internal processes in their enforcement, which is a black box to me, by the way. I don't have internal knowledge, but you can see from their public statements and their behavior afterwards, they knew there was a problem, the nefarious networks, they call them, and I think they're using more software now, and more possibly AI as well, to try to identify the problems. So that was fun. Yeah.
Right.
Winter overtime here.
Well, we're going to have
Penalty
a quick
kick
question
soon.
from Richard Winter here.
I'm not sure I can make it quick, but I'll try. David, thank you very much for choosing the FCC for your swan song. I was at the Hong Kong Club AGM last Thursday, and it was a sellout because everyone was hoping you would turn up to give your usual controversial questions, and you didn't, and everyone was very disappointed. I'm not sure how I can make my question quick. Am I allowed to ask a question? So we have our financial markets are core to Hong Kong. Our stock exchange is one of the key elements of Hong Kong, which has a monopoly. 2 exchanges, one is GEM. GEM is virtually a busted flush. There's only one company going through GEM at the moment, only one, and there's been almost nothing for the last 4 years. Our main board has gone down from the top 3 to below 10. It's picked up its skirts recently, only because of some substantial PRC companies. International companies are not listing here. Fintech's not listing because of the high thresholds. Sorry, it's a difficult question. But if you were a magician, what would you do, or would you do anything to try and change things?
Well, I've spoken about a few of those things, and there are many more things that should be done. But one thing is that they shouldn't be exempt from the competition ordinance. There's no reason for that, and we wouldn't be debating whether to close for lunch if we had 2 stock markets, because I suspect one of them, the new one, would want to stay open, and the other one would have to respond in kind. So the monopoly situation does retard the reform process. I spoke about the need to step up quarterly financial reporting and have independent shareholders elect the independent directors. It's not difficult. You just say that's a conflict of interest for any controlling shareholder, because the independent directors are supposed to say whether something is fair and reasonable when a controlling shareholder wants to buy it from the company or sell it to the company, for example, or take the company private. And a class action system that would allow investors to sue and auditor liability so that they would be liable to the investors and not just to the company. At the moment, the situation is the auditors can say, yeah, we should have noticed that you were faking your accounts, but how did that cause you any loss? You were faking it, and it's your loss, And the shareholders, they don't have to account to them at all. So there's lots of things I would change to auditor liability, class action rights, independent director elections, to raise the game of Hong Kong and make it an attractive place for companies that have stayed private. I mean, there are some good big businesses in Hong Kong that have never gone public, because what's the point when you only get a 10 times PE for your stock? We need to raise the game, not lower it, not race to the bottom. This was something that was identified long ago in a paper by George Akerlof, Janet Yellen's husband. He's a Nobel laureate, and he got his prize for the market for lemons, basically, saying that in a bad market, a second-hand car lot with no warranties, the good cars are driven out. They don't go there. And I've made my money over the years by avoiding the crooks more often than not, and by buying some of the few companies that accidentally went public despite the low valuations available to them. Perhaps they wanted to have more public profile or whatever, by seeking out the good corporate governance. If you randomly invested in small caps, you would underperform the main market. But I've benefited from the poor quality of regulation by finding the good guys that outperformed in the long run. And occasionally I did have explosions, but they weren't. They didn't completely offset my outperformance from the other stocks. GEM should be scrapped. There should be a single board in Hong Kong. There's hardly any difference between the two sets of regulations anyway. And we should scrap the profit requirements, because making a profit before you go public is a target for accounting manipulation. It's like you have to fake it to make it. And then, of course, after they go public, the profits collapse. So let's get rid of that rule.
Right, David, I'm sorry, but we have to end here, and I just think we all have to be very sorry that you're not going to be here contributing to Hong Kong's future for perhaps very much longer. And we can't be more deeply grateful what you've done and for coming here today. So, on behalf of all FCC members and indeed the whole journalistic community, I would just like to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for hosting.
Oh, a very modest gift.